Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. To pick up where Kim left off, another thing I want to point out is that my understanding is that these are neutral algorithms. In its brief, Google says that there are thousands of inputs that factor into these kind of search suggestions, including search history, watch history, location, time of day. The Google lawyer at the Supreme Court said that if you are Googling the word football, the answers that you get from a search engine or from YouTube will differ depending on whether you're in the United States or whether you're in Europe, where the words football mean different things to people. And so there was a nice conversation with Justice Clarence Thomas where he said if these are neutral algorithms and the people who are watching cooking videos get more cooking videos and the people who are watching videos about ISIS get more ISIS videos, he has a hard time seeing how Google is liable for that. But it is an interesting distinction, Alicia, because the petitioners are saying that Google has immunity for hosting and posting and publishing these videos. That's clearly in Section 230. But it's arguing that the recommendations, the up next, the autoplays after one YouTube video ends, a lot of times there will be another one that is played right after that. That is Google's conduct. And what Google's response is that those kind of things are inherent in the act of publishing the videos. If you have to have some way to sort this stuff, there are just enormous quantities of videos that are uploaded to YouTube every day. And it's not as if they're going to put them in reverse chronological order. You have to have some way of organizing that through a homepage, through recommendations or suggestions from the algorithm, through the up next feed. Otherwise, Alicia, the argument is that the internet would be basically unusable.
Right. And this is a function publishers do. Like our newspaper, if you go to the WSJ.com website, I mean, we organize content in different ways, and increasingly it's becoming more personalized. These are all controlled by algorithms, just like Google's is, in terms of what viewers will see next on YouTube, or in terms of the search results on its search engine. The plaintiffs also tried to draw some kind of distinction again between the recommendations in the YouTube videos and the search results. But I think once you start thinking about the practicality of that, well, that's a distinction without a difference, because again, they're both controlled by algorithms. To Clarence Thomas's point about the neutrality, which was a test kind of designed by the Ninth Circuit in its ruling on the case. I mean, I think Justice Gorsuch would probably say, well, this is a judge-made doctrine, and he's probably right, but also proves that in this case, the fact that Google is not actively involved really in promoting these ISIS videos. It might be different if, say, an actual Google editor or someone at Google was involved in trying to promote this content. And if the plaintiffs could show that, I think this would actually might be a different case. And if you look back at Backpage, this was a case in which a company was actually kind of actively involved in the sex trafficking, which resulted in the legislation known as SESTA, which created a carve-out for sex trafficking content when companies or internet or providers provide essentially knowingly aid and abet sex trafficking. So if the plaintiffs were to actually show that Google were knowingly and intentionally basically recommending these videos, the case might be a little different, but here it's just a neutral algorithm that doesn't distinguish between ISIS videos or cooking videos or puppy videos or anything else. It basically just feeds users what they want. And while maybe you can argue that there's a bug in its algorithms and that they shouldn't be feeding users what they want, but that gets to the underlying issue of the functionality of the platforms. They wouldn't be as functional. Users wouldn't use them as much. They wouldn't benefit as much from them. If the judges were to step in and say, these algorithms aren't protected under Section 230, you really would turn the entire internet, on its head.
Justice Clarence Thomas, though, who we've mentioned a few times, I mean, he was the guy that I thought was most interesting to watch during this argument, because as Alicia mentions, in previous rulings, he has been a little bit of a hawk on extending Section 230 protections. One example that Alicia mentioned is the stuff that the platform knows is illegal at the time that it's letting it be on its website. Clarence Thomas has suggested that that should be outside of 230. He has had the same suggestion for content that the platform had some kind of direct hand in creating or curating. If it's something more than just third-party content that the platform has not reviewed and is unaware of its contents. And I do think, Kim, that there are some harder questions that are coming as these systems get more and more sophisticated. And one that Justice Neil Gorsuch raised during the oral argument is, what about AI chatbots? Most prominently, ChatGPT has the one that has been blowing people's minds in recent days and months. And what if these companies start integrating those kinds of systems into their search results? So instead of going to a search engine and you get a list of links to third-party content, you go to the search engine and you ask it a question, and it scans all of that third-party content and it provides you what it thinks is an actual best answer. It starts to raise questions again about how we are going to apply this law from 1996 to these new technologies that were just unimaginable at the time that Congress was considering this.
Yeah, this is why what you mentioned about Clarence Thomas is so fascinating, because I think the one question that presents itself at some point is there some limiting principle to Section 230? Do you keep it, but are there boundaries beyond which things do fall outside of it? And I'm not sure the court is going to do that with this ruling because, again, the question of exactly what is complex, but there's a lot of things like what you mentioned, Kyle. I mean, what about situations in which, the tech company and platform in question is deciding what content to send you, has some sort of role in it beyond an algorithm? What about fact checks that some of these outfits place on articles or content? Does that somehow, that certainly would be a sort of human interaction and a decision that is being made by the company. And it's a really interesting question as to whether or not they are playing a role. We obviously know that these companies do take a role, by the way, in moderation as well. This has been obviously one of the big fights going on in Washington, and Republicans who've been very frustrated about what they view as too much content moderation, at least when it comes to certain political views, conservative political views. So there's going to be more of these as we go along. And that's why I think the best place for this still is Congress. The only thing that's a little bit worrying about that is that right now, these tech companies have managed to annoy everybody in Washington. Democrats think that they routinely don't do enough to take down harmful content online. Republicans, again, think that they're wavering too far into the realm of censorship. And so there is a little bit of a compact at the moment that something needs to be done on Section 230, but it's unclear that whatever comes out is going to be a very wise solution. It's also unclear how long it's going to take for this to get done. Congress is simply not good at stuff like this. It's only good at spending these days. Any kind of policy debates, it takes forever. And even John Roberts mentioned that in the oral arguments yesterday, that maybe waiting for Congress, by the time that happens, the internet could blow up. But I still think that they are best positioned because you're going to need a lot of thought, a lot of talk with the tech companies to kind of figure out a solution here that updates this for the modern world.
Alicia, what's your take on this question of the prospects in Congress for reform? I agree completely with Kim that both parties, at least large elements of them, have turned against the tech companies, but in completely different ways, where many people on the left want Twitter, to take an example, to take down more posts. And many people on the right think that they are taking down way too many posts. And so I can imagine some sort of ancillary reforms or additions to 230 to update the terms that it uses from the old 1990s terms to terms that we would recognize like social media, or to mandate transparency or something like that. But Alicia, I guess I have a hard time imagining Congress coming to an agreement that would significantly pare back the 230 immunity.
Right. So what we saw a few years ago in the aftermath of what happened with Backpage was that Congress did actually come to a bipartisan agreement to carve out sex trafficking from Section 230's protection. And I could potentially see maybe Congress doing something on terrorist content, maybe. But what would be most helpful would be if Congress actually clarified the terms and what internet providers and other companies actually deserve immunity protection for. There's a phrase in Section 230 that they would receive protection when they remove lewd, lascivious, and otherwise objectionable material. And there's been a lot of debate among Republicans and others whether misinformation is classified or can be classified as otherwise objectionable just because these internet companies don't like COVID or climate information that conservatives are posting, and that some of these companies are using Section 230 as cover to essentially act as publishers and act as editors and take down content that simply progressives don't like. Whether Congress can actually get themselves together and actually agree on something, I have a hard time saying because, again, as you point out, that the goals are simply very different on the right and left. The right complains that the companies are censoring too much content. The left says that they're not taking down enough. And by not enough, they mean not just the ISIS videos. What they really mean is material or conservative ideas on climate and COVID in particular, but could potentially see how they would expand that to other realms that could affect government policies. So where this goes, I think it's probably going to end up percolating, and more cases are going to end up percolating in the courts, and they're going to have to grapple with these questions, as you mentioned, ChatGPT, the state actor doctrine, in terms of whether, if governments push or essentially insisting on companies taking down content, whether that actually falls under Section 230 and First Amendment issues. But I imagine this is really going to be an issue that is going to stay in the courts rather than actually get it resolved by Congress.
Thank you, Alicia and Kim. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.